Thank you, Wallace. My name's Dan, and I'm an alcoholic.
Amen.
The reason I look so good is because I can. If you had seen me when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, you wouldn't recognize me today, I promise you. I weighed 115 pounds. I had everything I owned on my body. A pair of tennis shoes and a high water breeches and a t-shirt. And today I've got a lot of jackets and I've got a lot of suits. And it's all because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is September the 5th, 1983. For that, I'm very grateful. And I owe it to people just like you in rooms just like this. Program of Alcoholics Anonymous. 12 steps, 12 traditions, and 12 concepts working in and through my life. And Wallace was right. I love this program. I love AA. AA's given me everything I am and ever will be. I was a low-bottom drunk, and I'll get to that in a minute. I was one of 4 boys. I was the middle son of 4 boys. Only alcoholics can figure that out. None of my other brothers are alcoholics. A couple of them had bad drinking problems, but they weren't alcoholics. And as I had it figured out, I figured my oldest brother was the first, so he was loved the most. And the second one was probably 4 years older than me. So they thought he was the youngest, so he was loved a lot. And then I came along 4 years later, and right after me, my little brother. And he was the baby, so I was ignored in my mind. So I grew up not fitting into my family. I went to school, and I didn't fit into school. I'll never forget when I first got to school, I looked around, and everybody else seemed to know exactly where to go, what to do, who their teacher was going to be, where their lockers were, and I didn't have a clue. And I went through life like that until I found Alcoholics Anonymous. But as I grew up, every place that I went, I never seemed to fit in. Didn't fit in at school. I was a little runt. I was not 5 foot tall till I was in the 9th grade. So I was too small to play sports. So I was the resident thug in my high school. And I had a couple of other thugs that run around with me, and we got into all the trouble. We broke the windows, we smoked cigarettes, and caught old houses on fire. Whatever happened was our fault. And I got out of high school, and all my friends, I graduated high school very early. I was 15 years old. And all my friends were 18 years old, 19. They were getting married and having fun and getting married and having kids and raising families. And I was at the party age. I had my first drunk when I was 13. And by the time I got out of high school, I was party time. And I always had been mentally and hairy challenged. I wasn't very smart, and I didn't have much hair, so I could buy alcohol by the time I was 15. And I wanted to be able to go out with the guys that I went to high school with. And the wives would let their husband go out with me one time, and then when they didn't get in until maybe 2 days later, they wouldn't let them go with me anymore. So I figured if I got married, I could join in with the married crowd. So I went to Mexico, and I married my first wife at 16 years old, and she was 15. Down there, you didn't need parental consent. You just went down and signed a little piece of paper about this big. They put both your names on it, and that you were married, and that was it. And that marriage lasted 2 weeks. And she was ready to go home to mama, and she did. And I got an annulment in the mail about a year later, I think. But I was strictly a blackout, pass-out drinker from the time I had my first drunk. And I managed to get jobs pretty easily. And I never forget, I went to Mexico, New Mexico, on a job, and I had bought this car, my first automobile. My dad had signed the papers for me because I was too young. And I bought this old car, it cost $300. It was a 1949 Oldsmobile, two-door, hardtop, straight 8 V8 engine, rocket. And I got drunk up in New Mexico, and the car ran out of gas. Coming back from Texas, we had to go out to the Texas state line to get drunk on the weekends. I went out and I run out of gas on the way home, and I drove the car off in a ditch and said, that'll teach that car to run out of gas on me. And I never went back and got it. I was not very smart, I'm telling you. When I was in my booze, and that's not the first and only stupid thing I did. I spent a lot of time in jail. I went overseas. My second wife, I married up before I went in the Army. In fact, she caused me to go in the Army. She got pregnant. And I didn't want the responsibility of a kid, so I joined the Army. Went to basic training. My daughter was born, and they sent me to advanced training in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I went from there straight to Korea. And my second wife sent me divorce papers while I was in Korea. So that didn't last long, but I did have a daughter. And the Army, I thought, was the ideal way of life. In Korea, whiskey was $1 a bottle. Cigarettes were 90 cents a carton. They give me all the clothes I could wear, all the food I could eat, and a bed to sleep on. And I thought I had found heaven here on earth. And for 14 years it was. I stayed in the military for 14 years. In the meantime, got another wife and had a son. But the drinking just got worse and worse, and it caused me to basically give up a good life in the Army. I had a basic battery commander that told me on my 14th anniversary that if I re-enlisted, he was going to do everything in his power to reduce me to a private and get me kicked out on an undesirable discharge because I'd caused him a lot of heartaches. So I said to myself, I'll just show him, I'll get out of this Army. And I did. I got out of the Army, and that led to my next divorce. Things went from bad to worse then. I told myself, I said, I'll never have another job that lasts over a year. Little did I know how true that was to be. I went to work for my ex-father-in-law on the mountains out between Abilene and Fort Worth, Texas. And he had a bunch of wetbacks out there that he had gathering rocks and stacking on trucks. And I run backhoe and a bulldozer digging rock out for him for 6 months. And he was paying me pretty good, and I was drawing my unemployment for 6 months. End of 6 months, I'd bought a car, saved up a pocket full of money, and I told him, I said, I gotta quit. I'm going to Fort Worth and get drunk. And I did. I stayed drunk. I went and got me a motel and paid 3 months rent on it. I started to drink, and about 4 months later, I'm living out on the street and had sold my car, had been kicked out of the motel, and I figured it's time to go back to work. So got another job, went back to work for 2 or 3 months, saved up some money, bought an old junker car, paid up some rent, a month or so on a motel, started drinking again, and this went on, and the length of time I worked started getting shorter and shorter, and the drunk started getting longer and longer. And my last drunk lasted 4 years with no jobs. And you can drink and not work. You have to steal a lot. And you have to be willing to break into liquor stores. And you have to be willing to go to jail a lot. I don't know how many times I've been in jail, but I had some jobs along that'll last a little while, but not ever over a few months. I had one that was really a good experience. I was getting drunk over in Grand Prairie, Texas, which is on the state line, or the county line between Fort Worth and Dallas. I lived in an old motel. I worked with the school system as a janitor. And I had a good boss. He would, as soon as we went in and cleaned up our area of the school, he'd let us go and he'd stay there and sign us out. We got 8 hours pay. And I'd be over to the county line drinking within 4 hours because I worked fast so I could get over there. Well, every Friday night, the cops would come by and they'd pick me up, take me to jail, and it would cost me $51.50 to get out on Sunday morning when the judge came. And this went on for a long, long time. And a guy come by one evening, he said, let's go over to Dallas, drink this evening. I said, fine, let's go. Got over to Dallas, the same thing happened. I went out to a joint and got drunk and got picked up by the law, and they took me down and they put me in jail. Well, Sunday morning, took us before the judge. It only cost $25 to get out of jail. I said, well, this is where I'm going to do all my drinking. It just costs half as much to drink over here. Never once entered my mind that if I didn't get drunk, I didn't have to pay anything. That thought never come across my mind. But I ended up doing my final drinking. I was in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is where I'd spent a lot of the time in the military, and my last ex-wife was there with my son, who I wasn't having anything to do with because I didn't want him to see that his dad had turned into the town drunk, or one of them. And I was sitting beside the bridge that I was living under. I lived under a lot of bridges, burnt-out cars, vacant houses. And it was on a Sunday morning, and a guy comes up to me and says, I said, boy, I'm hungry. When you're drinking, I'd been reduced to drinking grapes by then. And wine, if you drink a lot of wine, you don't get real hungry. But you do have to eat once in a while. And I told this guy, I said, where can we get something to eat today? I said, I'm starving. He said, well, right over here. It wasn't very far, 100 yards to, there was no VFW building. He said, they'll have somebody will go over there and talk a while, and then they'll feed you. And I said, I can do that. I can listen to somebody talk if they'll feed me. I didn't know it, but once a year in Lawton, Oklahoma, they had all the different groups got together and they had a speaker come in. They had an eating meeting. And I got over there and I saw all these rows of tables lined up, and on the very back row there was a row of food. So I went and sat at the next table to it. Everybody else was sitting down front. I'm the only one sitting there. And a guy comes down from down front, and he comes back and he gives me a pack of cigarettes and a book of matches and an ashtray. Everybody smoked in AA meeting. He said, we'll feed after the speaker, son. And I looked at him like, what do you want from me? Well, I had everything on that I had. It wasn't much I had that he wanted, I was sure. But I sat through that meeting, and the speaker got up to speak. And he had on a big suit, gold chain with a gold token on his neck, diamond rings flashing, looking good. And I'd seen him get out of a big black new Lincoln car. And he got up there on that podium and he told my story. He'd been everywhere I'd been, done everything I'd done, and he did it with one leg. He was standing there on crutches. He got drunk and had one of his legs cut off by a train. But for the first time, I had hope. I had hope that I did not have to die with some drunk beating me in the head for my bottle of wine, because I'd seen that happen more than once. And instead of asking someone there, where there's 300 alcoholics, something about AA, I ate their food, And I went back to the park and I asked the drunk. I said, anybody here know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, if they'd have known very much, they wouldn't have been there. One guy did know there was a halfway house in Lawton, and he told me where it was at. So I didn't drink anything that night. I probably had DTs, but I didn't drink anything. I went there the next morning. I knocked on the door. The cook came to the door. So what you want? I said, I want some of this AA stuff. He says, you have to go down to the back, and behind the halfway house in the alley, they had a little house that was the detox. So I went back there and knocked on the door. Guy came to the door. He said, what do you want? I said, I want some of this AA stuff. He says, I can't help you. You're not drunk. I said, you wait right here. I can fix that. And when I came back, I promise you I was drunk enough that he took me. That was sometime in August. And I claimed September the 5th as my sobriety date. So I promise you I was good and drunk by the time I got back. But anyway, I sobered up in that halfway house in Lawton, Oklahoma. And they had meetings there in the house 2 or 3 times a week. And in Lawton, you had to go around to different groups in order to make a meeting every day or 2. And I would do that. I would make those meetings. I would make as many meetings as I could because I'd hear you talk and I could relate to the things that you said. Now, if anybody's here is new tonight, you don't have to do like I did. You don't have to go out and drink until you have to live in the street. Just try to relate to the feelings that I'm going to talk about. I was so despondent. I was so worried about the things that I'd done to the people I love, that I lived all my life thinking about the things that I'd done and what was going to happen in the future that I never lived in today. Well, I got into those AA meetings, and for a long time I wouldn't hold hands with another man. I wouldn't do any of those things that were unmanly. And I wouldn't speak. I wouldn't say anything. And I guess I'd been going for a month and a half. And finally I went to an AA meeting in Oklahoma. They called them a call-up meeting. And whoever was chairing would speak for 5 minutes or so, and then they'd point to somebody and say, I want to hear from him. And he'd get up and talk. And finally, somebody pointed at me and said, I want to hear from that guy. And I took the longest walk I've ever taken in my life. And I walked up that podium and I said, for the first time, my name's Dan and I'm an alcoholic. And then I broke down and bawled like a baby. And they just started clapping. And for the first time in my life, I belonged someplace. I hadn't belonged in my family. I hadn't belonged in school, in the army. Everywhere I felt I was an outsider until that night in that AA meeting. And you couldn't have run me out of this place with a stick. I fell in love with AA right there. And then I started doing what they told me to do. And I got me a sponsor. And my sponsor, Frank was a great guy. And I had to tell you this, that I was very prejudiced when I got here. I was a WASP. And I kept looking for somebody that I could relate to. And I finally picked Frank. And Frank was a black Catholic Yankee. And Frank worked 2 jobs. He didn't have much time for me. He bought me a big book. He bought me a cover for it. And he said, don't ever write in this big book because you'll have it so wrote up you'll never find anything. I still have that big book almost 30 years later and still don't have any writing in it, but I know where things are in it. And every time I'd go to Frank with a problem or a question, he'd say, first 164 pages of the big book have the answer to all your problems. And if you don't, read it again, and if you don't find it, come to me and I'll straighten you out. I did what Frank said. I read the big book, and sure enough, every time, he was a perfect sponsor. Every time I would find the answer to my question. Until it come to girls. Now, you know, guys, when you sober up, one of the first things you got to do when you get clean, you get clean clothes on and $1 or $2 in your pocket, you got to have a girl. Well, I went to Frank. I said, Frank, I said, how about a girl? He said, no, let me tell you what you need to do. He said, you get the next guy that comes into this halfway house and you put him under your arm and you take him around and you take him to the doctor. We had a doctor. He said, you take him to Salvation Army and get him some clothes. Then you start taking him to all the meetings. He said, help him get sober. So I did that. First one lasted a week or two. Then he got drunk and got kicked out. He said, get you another one. Got me another one. He lasted the same week or two. He got kicked out. Now this is a 28-day program, guys. After about 3 months, I'm still there. And I'm still getting these guys and trying to take them around and get them sober. And I go to Frank. I said, Frank, this ain't working. He said, what? I said, not one of those guys has stayed sober. He said, no, but you have. And Frank taught me early on, service. Work with another alcoholic when all else fails. You want to stay sober, work with another alcoholic. And Frank took me to district meetings, and he took me to area meetings, and he got me involved in service work, and I've been involved ever since. And then finally it happened. I kept going to all these different meetings, and I saw this gal with a blonde afro. Cute little gal, weighed about 120 pounds. And I got talking to her after the AA meetings. All the groups would go to the same coffee shop. And we'd sit around, drink coffee, and the waitress didn't make any money, but we sure made them a lot of money on coffee and cakes. And I got talking to this gal every night. And then we got to where we was going to the same meetings together. Anyway, she's over there now. We've been married 28 years. Shelby. Best thing that's happened to me since AA. But we didn't get married right away, of course, and things just seemed to work in our favor that she got a job going. She told me she had to leave and go to Dallas area to go to work. And I said, well, I just got a job, a steady job. I'd had quite a few jobs, but I got a steady job laying pipe as a ditch digger. And I said, well, I'll be making enough money I can afford to go down to Dallas on the weekends maybe and see you. And the week after she told me that, I come back up to Lawton. I was in another town laying pipeline. And a guy come up to me and he said, how much money are you making? And I told him. He said, I'll double that if you'll go to Dallas with me. And I says, must be God talking. I took the job. But I had to have a truck, pickup. He said, you got to have a pickup. So Shelby and I together raked up, I don't know, about $1,000. And I needed $400 or $500 more. The only people I knew was in AA. So I went to the guy that had been my last boss when I was drinking. And I didn't know it then, but he was in AA. And I went to a lot of meetings with him after that. And he was glad to see me in AA. I went to him and I borrowed some money. And I was going out of town and he trusted me. I went to the halfway house and I borrowed some more money from the guys that worked in the halfway house. I'd been there 6 months by the time they kicked me out. They gave me the money and I bought this old pickup, this old blue pickup. And Shelby and I went to Texas with everything we owned in her car and my pickup. And life has just been so good since then. I continue to work the steps. I got to Texas, and that's where all my folks were, in Dallas, Fort Worth area. And by this time, I was at that point in my program where I needed to make my amends. And I got to do that right there. I got to start making my amends. That's where my children were, or one of my children. And Shelby and I have had such a wonderful life, and I got to make amends to all those people that I thought I'd drank up and wasn't going to be in my life anymore. And it just seems like the longer that we stay sober and we stay in this program, the better things get. We started out, we were in a little apartment that was so small that you had to put the kitchen table up to get in the bathroom. That was our first place. We went from there to renting an apartment, and then we got a trailer. Then we bought a trailer. And then we bought a home in Fort Worth. And then Shelby's mom and dad were getting real old. She wanted to be out here close to them, and her brother sent me a movie with the house that we're living in now. And it was pretty run down. It was an old 2-story Victorian over in Maxton. And he said, I know you won't want this house, but I saw what could happen to that house. Because that's the way I've been making my living, was restoring old houses and old businesses back to their original condition. So we come out here and made a deal, and we bought the house. And we were going to just come out and work on it when we could, and eventually move out here. God don't work that way in my lives. While we were out here to buy it, Shelby was offered a job. She had been laid off in Texas. She was offered a job out here. We went back home. We put our house on the market. In 2 weeks, it sold, and here we came. I brought one of my helpers with me from Texas. Hired a guy in Maxton, and we worked for a year and a half restoring our house, one room at a time. And everywhere you move, they want houses restored and businesses restored. So went to work in Maxton. Shelby went to work for First Health, and it's just ballooned from there. And we've been here. Her mother and dad died, and my mom died back in Texas. 2 of my brothers and 1 of her brothers. We've had a lot of things happen since we've been in AA, but we hadn't had to drink over any of them. I had to go back to Texas. My son got in a motorcycle accident. He had a concussion and went into a coma, and was in a coma for 5 days. They didn't know if he was going to come out or not. While we were there, or before we got there, my ex-wife offered to let me and Shelby stay at her home while my son was in the hospital. That only happened because I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've made amends. You know, my daughter's mother died a couple of years back. I had got to make amends to her. And one of the things that comes to mind about amends is my brother, just older than me, died in Hugo, Oklahoma, and we went there for the funeral, and here comes my wife and son, my ex-wife. My daughter's mother was there. Shelby and these 2 ex-wives of mine are sitting at a table drinking coffee, being sociable with each other. And it's only because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. People out there, their ex-wives don't get together. I'm going to promise you that. But because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's possible. We just had a wonderful Christmas. We decorate our house every year. And when we first moved to Maxton, the first year we were there, and I was working on the house, had all the porch posts down, and I was taking the paint off of them and repainting them. The mayor came up and parked in the front of the yard, and he said, "What are you going to do with this old house?" I said, "I'm going to put Maxton on the map with this house." And he kind of laughed, and he said, "Well, good luck." And then after we got it redone, we have it in, it's a white house with green and red trim, and we call it the Christmas house. Shelby and I had a business. Everything Cobby we've ever had has turned into a business. Doing ceramics and going around in Texas to ceramic shows. And we had all these Santa Clauses and angels and Christmas things left, 100 of them, 200 or 300 probably. Plus we had a bunch of Christmas trees. So we decorate the house every Christmas. Put a Christmas tree in every room, 17 Christmas trees. Santa Claus is everywhere, manger scenes. Then we'd charge people to come through and look at the house. Then we'd donate the money to the Maxton Historic Society. Well, the word got around, the newspapers started coming in from Fayetteville and South Carolina, and then the TV people wanted to come, and then the Victorian Homes magazine did a print up and put us between the governor's mansion and Biltmore House. We were right between them in that magazine. So when that came out, the mayor came to me and says, "Thank you for putting Maxton on the map." And we still decorate some, but all our grandkids are grown now and got their own families, and they don't have time to help us decorate, so we're not quite as elaborate decorations anymore. But we had 19 people in our house Christmas. Kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. And we were opening presents and eating, just having a wonderful time. And we were praying with each other. The program has given us so much in relationships, you know. I used to think when I first got sober, if I could just have a car and a girlfriend, and you know, I cut myself so short of what this program really had to offer me. All those relationships I thought I had drank up have been given back to me. My son and my daughter both love me. They won't see me. They enjoy it when we come to Texas. My son comes down from Oklahoma to my daughter's house. They have different mothers, but they got me for a dad, and they come and let me know that they love me. I go to Texas, and I got a group, Bruton Terrace, that I go to because it's close to my daughter's house. And it's like my Texas home group. And I almost felt like I was home tonight. See Larry here from Dallas, and my Abilene buddy back here. I just have friends from all over. And Shelby and I travel a lot, and we try to go to AA meetings everywhere we go. And you'd be surprised. You can go to, we went to an AA meeting up in Wyoming once, and went in, they just threw a big book in the middle of the floor around the circle. We were sitting in a circle, and they threw a big book on the floor, and one guy picked it up, read a page, and wasn't any coffee, wasn't anything. That's what we had a meeting on. We got up and we said the Trinity prayer, and meeting was over. I come back to our meeting over in Laurinburg, and that we go to, and I was talking to Buddy McCarter, who's passed away, telling him about it. He said, "I went to that meeting. This is a small world, AA is, I'm going to tell you. I never expected to see Larry here tonight. I see him all over the place. I think last time I saw him was in San Antonio. But I love you people. I love this program. I've been given so much. I'm so rich today. And I know I owe everything I am, have, and ever will be to this program. And I know this is y'all's birthday night, so I'm going to cut it short and leave you some time to give out your chips. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come and be with you tonight and sharing the joy of people getting their chips. Thank you so much.